Hi guys, welcome back. So England absolutely outclassed France 44-8 with a bonus point at half time. It was absolutely emphatic. Absolutely loved the game. Obviously that first half performance from England was another fantastic performance to follow on with the kind of 80-minute performance against Ireland. So well done to England. You know, again, not getting too carried away, but in isolation those two games are brilliant. Back to back, brilliant performances. I will mention France quickly because I have had some comments saying why don't you talk about France, and of course on this channel I talk about England, Ireland, Scotland and Wales, but I'll mention France. That what is the problem with them? They just simply haven't fully embraced all aspects of modern professional rugby. You know, in the nicest possible way. They're doing some things incredibly well. Clearly their talent identification and some of their youth development, their age groups are doing really well. But when it comes to their national team and their professional teams, things like maybe nutrition, diet, training, detail of game plan and sticking to game plans and discipline, emotional control, are things that other countries have now moved ahead at. And they need a big shake-up. Maybe even, dare I say it, a Southern Hemisphere coaching team coming in and shaking things up and changing things and bringing them dragging and screaming into the modern era. Very much like Clive Woodward did with England when they were very amateur and he kind of almost dragged them into professionalism. Warren Gatland kind of revolutionised Wales and did that with them. Then you've got obviously Vern Cotter and Gregor Townsend doing the same. And obviously Smith, very detailed with Ireland. All those teams have moved on to that extra level of professional detail, and France need to follow, basically. So that's I'll leave it there for France. But France's offloading game is not a bad way to counter England's press defence. Okay, even though they only did it in patches, it still shows if you want to get around England's defence, this an offloading game is not a bad way of doing it, because you just can't quite line up the hits as well. That being said, England got plenty of big hits in, and certainly the one we all remember was Courtney Lawes' massive hit against Bastareaud. It was like literally Newton's second law of motion in action right there. Take a bit of working out that one, comment if you know what I'm talking about, but it was like felling a tree. That was fantastic. And again, Bastareaud, some of the French comments I've seen in the press saying he should move into number 8, and they're missing the point. He's a very talented player who they've allowed to get incredibly overweight for some reason, rather than saying you're a professional and you need to be at this percentage body fat. Anyway, those are the sorts of things I'm talking about. I will stop now. Okay, but England had success in those big hits. They did force mistakes, and after just over a minute, Johnny May scores again, best winger in the tournament, absolutely lightning quick. The best try he scored was when he went one-on-one against Penaud and stood him up completely. That was brilliant, so hats off to Johnny May. 2 great games back-to-back. Really good performances. And France did do some decent kicking, actually. They caused England some problems with some decent kicking from Lopez and Parra, but it wasn't enough. And Parra just looked so painfully slow. When he turned to chase back for Johnny May's try, I think it was the first try, he had a good 5-metre head start, and then he was a good 10 metres behind. I know Johnny May is quick, but twice as quick. That was a bit embarrassing. So I think Dupont has to start for France. He's clearly the talent. Johnny May did a nice little hold on Dupont on the ground, which is it is illegal. You can't hold someone on the ground when they're not in a ruck, or you can't hold someone on the ground unless you're tackling them, basically. Anyway, the French backfield was an absolute mess. Just a mess. Huget's selection at 15 was a Huget mistake. And the guy who came on, I forget his name, who's a proper full-back, looked a lot better. But certainly that was an absolute error. And England kicked crazy amount of times. I think it was almost a record amount of times, because they were getting so much success from it. That's what coaches say, don't they? If something's working, keep on doing it. And England just kept on kicking into space, varying it where they kick from. I'll come to that in a minute. And they were just getting massive dividends from it. The wingers hated going backwards. Huget was all over the place. So why not? Last week, the big focus of England's performance was their impressive defence, which was there again. But I started to see some of the attack I think they've been working on. Now, it's impossible to know unless you're in their camp. Eddie Jones said they have just started to work on their attack. Clearly, their starter plays aren't quite there. They're not revealing anything particularly special set-piece move-wise. But certainly their phase play off 9, I've noticed them running some interesting variations there, which I haven't seen other media outlets comment on, so I'm just going to talk about that. So runners off 9, obviously England are getting big ball carriers off Ben Youngs, front foot ball, blah, 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 makes sense. But they're changing it up slightly. This layered runner I talked about last week, they were doing again, where you have one runner kind of up quite flat and then another one following in behind, not because the guy behind's there just to ruck the guy in front. The 9 is, Ben Youngs is choosing who to hit, just creating confusion in the French defence. And they ran an interesting, a little slice, a little crossover move. If you've ever played in the centres with a 12 going in and 13 going out, either in front or behind, it was the same thing, but with forwards runners. England had a big runner going from out, in, across the front of a runner going in to out, and I think they went behind to the guy going out. So that's clearly another variation they've worked on. Obviously they will do the standard 3 and just latch them through, push them through, fine. But also Ben Youngs, I noticed when the runners were a bit too deep, he would break slightly when that was happening. He wouldn't just break for the sake of it and then pull the runners onto him and put the guys through. So in isolation, all those tactics for running off 9 aren't new, but it's the fact they were varying them a lot. It was quite hard for the French defence to pick up where the runner was coming from. They just knew it was coming fast and pretty much not static. England deliberately played quick. Even if it meant their attack got ragged at times, they just knew it was the best way to go to beat the French, and so it proved. Okay, Curry playing right on the edge, classic 7. He needs practice doing that. England's kicking game was brilliant, and they varied it, mainly because they have multiple guys who are great at kicking the ball. Youngs kicks the ball, Farrell kicks the ball, Daly kicks the ball, Slade kicks the ball. So that's 4 really good options. So, there's nothing wrong with kicking it, but if you know what's coming, that's when the problem can happen. And Ireland's media certainly jumped on the box kick, saying we're box kicking too much from Murray. And the problem isn't the box kick. That's not the issue. It's the fact it's maybe a bit repetitive and people know what's coming so they can plan for it. So I think that's the issue there. And England kicked a lot, but their kicks were very varied, really, really varied. And whilst we're on kicking in the French back 3, you've got Fickou on one wing, who's a good centre. He's a centre. Penaud on the other wing, who's clearly a very talented player, but he prefers to play centre. So why not play them in the centres? Because the centres they played looked pretty ordinary to me. Bastro we've talked about, of course. So it's just weird. France are compounding errors with selection errors and not enough tactics, not enough cohesion. Anyway, I said I wouldn't talk any more about France. The try that France did score was a good try, and it was a comedy of errors from the English, actually. If you want a little chuckle, watch it. I think the Vunipola brothers bump into each other and fall over, and then someone tackles, an English player tackles another English player that lets Huget through. It was a good finish from Penaud, but that was the worst bit of play for England for sure. And at half-time, England are 30 points to 8 up. The game is wrapped up. It's bonus point. It's over. And that's why the game just loses its coherence. It's a little bit more bitty. The edge is gone, understandably. Eddie Jones made a big thing about saying he loved the second half, but I think he was just trying to big it up because they tried to keep going even though all the motivation really had gone. But anyway, we saw the scrum row, the front row replacements for England come on and win a penalty straight away, which is good, but then they did concede penalties in the scrum as well. I'm not quite sure what Cole adds massively. I think Williams is definitely a better player at the moment. Cole's just a bit too slow, unfortunately, at the moment. Moon did well. He's a good guy to have, certainly. Him and Genge is an interesting problem who to start. And then they brought on their subs. I I thought Hughes looked really sharp. He's looked the sharpest and fittest I've seen him for England, and he's not doing silly things. He's carrying a lot lower, so fair play to Hughes. I wasn't sure about him before. But the guy they didn't bring on was Dan Robson, until right at the end, really. Why? Why have him in camp for 2 games solid, exclude Danny Care, and then when you're 40 points up, pretty much, you're not even then going to bring him on? He doesn't trust him. It must be. There's only one real reason he didn't bring him on earlier. He just doesn't think he's quite good enough. And how do you know unless you play him? He looked incredibly nervous, understandably so. He did a couple of good things, nothing wrong. But the Wales game looks like the decider for the Six Nations, potentially. But what do you do now? You've only seen Robson for 10 minutes. It's the biggest game. I think Care comes straight back in. And if he does come straight back in, what was the point of having Robson? I think Eddie Jones has done this before. He looks at people in training, and if he doesn't like what he sees, they either go home or they hardly play. I can only think that's what it is. Comment below if you know any different. In the second half, to be fair, France started to play some good stuff. Garrado made some nice, good, clean breaks, but they didn't score. In the end, didn't score at all. They'd always cough up a mistake or not quite put it together. On comes Ford in the game. He forces it a little bit too much, potentially, trying to make something happen. Farrell's was just a masterclass of control. Maybe it's just the stage in the game. It was hard for Ford to come on and show control when it was all a little bit disparate. Yeah, so 44-8 at full time. A bit meaningless second half for the Six Nations, but it was good to bring on young players. Give them Luke Cowan-Dickie, for example, I thought did really well. I think they're your best 2 hookers, for sure. Yeah, anyway, there you go. So George, I think, is nailed on his number 1. Billy was a bit better. Hope Mako's ankle's not too serious. I don't think it is. Wilson's pretty much nailed down his number 6 shirt. Another great performance there. Good control from Youngs, Farrell masterclass. Daly adds creativity and options in behind. On the wings, I would say, you know, Ashton and Noel, good, but I still think Cokanasiga offers more. I would like to see him in the 23 for Wales. And the England women won, and the England under-20s won against France, so it was just a really good weekend for England. Anyway, 2 weeks off, Wales next. I've seen reports already saying England are going to beat Wales. It's not a problem. I can't see them losing. And I think people just don't quite understand how up for it Wales will be. Wales versus England in Wales is just huge. They will want to beat England so bad. Six Nations World Cup will go out the window for that game. It's all about beating England. So England are going to have to be incredibly good to come away with a win there. So it's going to be awesome. And until next time, I will see you later.